Hi everyone, welcome to chapter 5. So this chapter we're going to talk all about learning, the ways in which we understand learning, and the ways in which we've studied learning. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll talk about a few things in this first section. So the main thing I want to first start off by talking about is the kind of different ways that we kind of define learning and how we kind of structure and organize this idea of what learning actually does. And there's really three main characteristics or properties of learning when we're talking about this idea or this concept. And the first one is that learning, we kind of say, is relatively permanent. So when we talk about learning, we're talking about learning things and retaining those things. So it's not that we learn them for a short period of time and then they're gone. That wouldn't be true learning. In this case, the learning we're talking about is maintained learning that lasts for relatively long periods of time, or is permanent in this case. The second piece of this is we talk about how it involves changes in behavior. So when we learn things, we might be able to observe that learning through changes in behavior, and that's one of the ways that we measure this learning that has occurred. And then lastly, the third piece of this is that learning comes from us interacting with the environment. And so when we look at this interaction, we look at how this learning takes place. It takes place from us taking in information from the outside world, from our environment, and taking some piece of that and having it change our behavior and our way of thinking. And we learn that information. And again, this lasts in some permanent fashion. So this is kind of what we define learning as and how we're going to kind of conceptualize it as we kind of go through this chapter. I also want to kind of point out and discuss too this idea of kind of the three different ways that we're going to talk about learning, or the three different main classifications of learning. And so if we think about this, we really have kind of the first one is what we call either classical, right? Classical conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning. So we also call this Pavlovian. And that's partially because it comes from Ivan Pavlov, who is kind of the main proponent of this type of learning, or in this case, conditioning. The second main classification, or the second main type of learning that we have, is what we call operant conditioning. So we'll talk about that as well, but we have operant conditioning. And then the third piece that we have is what we call sort of like social learning, or learning through observation. So we have this idea of learning through observing other people, or again, observational learning. And we're going to talk about all three of these as we kind of go through this chapter, through this section. But generally, the first one, classical Pavlovian conditioning, talks a lot about how we can take reflexes and automatic responses outside of our control and use those to train and respond to new stimuli. Operant conditioning has more to do with this idea of our conscious behaviors and our choices, and learning good choices versus bad choices. And then social or observational learning has all to do with this idea of observing others and learning from kind of observing and watching what other people do. So we're going to get into all three of these as we go, and we'll see more about them.